right. Well, then, here we are talking about coaching and psychedelics. As almost always, I'm here with my wonderful co-host, Julia Bamberg. Hello.
Hello again.
Also, my name is Yannick, if you're listening to this for the first time. And we have a special guest here, Katja Wallisch. Hello.
Hi. Lovely to be here.
Indeed, we've connected literally just now in person. You were actually, I found that Jan, hello to Jan, by the way, part of our team, who dug you up and is like, well, here's a coach connected to the ICF with decent coach training and also really active in the psychedelic space. And so you checked each other out a little bit, and he's like, "Oh, you got to talk to Katja. That's going to be great." So we've been really interested and curious about how you work and why you work and why you think coaching and psychedelics are a good idea, and how you make the best out of bringing them together. So I can't wait. So I'd say let's dive in and see what you bring to us and to the space and to your clients.
Yes. Well, where do I start? Let me start with that. Basically,
can I make an invitation to start somewhere? Because what we usually ask our guests is, how do you introduce yourself if you find yourself at a dinner party? You can choose the context of what dinner party that is. But I'm curious when somebody just says, hey, what do you do? What do you tell people?
Oh, I say I'm an expert for transformation. All different levels. And then I go deeper into that. I coach and mentor people, and also, work with different tools. I would say spiritual technology. And that's for me also something like psychedelics. And in my case, plant medicine. I'm very, very connected to shamanism and plant medicine. It's been a big catalyst in my life, completely changed my life. I'm so grateful towards the plant allies and where they brought me and where I am now in life, and helping others to also make, I would say, very intentional steps and experiences with it to get the benefits from it.
I bet after that, especially the way you say it, right? If you're not watching this, but you're listening to this, I mean, just when you started speaking, your face told a story that already got me curious about what kind of transformation is that transformation? Because that looks really exciting.
Well, it's been a big one. So I had a very different career. I worked in corporate for more than 10 years in the fashion and lifestyle industry, really fun jobs for cool companies. And then plant medicine found me very unexpectedly. So I wasn't looking for it. It just, when the time is ready, it finds you. That's what they say. I knew I'll do a little deep dive into my story and how I got there. Then you understand also the way how I'm working. So I was going to Mexico, one of my soul places. And I knew, okay, I'm coming back to the same place in Tulum. I can't just go and be on the beach as always. I need to see something different. And I had been wishing for a really, really deep and meaningful spiritual experience on that journey.
You had been waiting, did you say?
Yeah, well, wishing for it. Mm-hmm. That was my intention. And I looked at the map, and a name stuck out. It jumped at me, when I read it, Palenque, all my chakras open. I'm like, okay, what's going on here? So I'm very tuned in and very energy sensitive. And I noticed that I'm responding to something. So I said, okay, let me look it up what it is. And it said it's 10 hours away from where I'm actually going. It's in the jungle. There's ruins. And I thought to myself, okay, well, then let's go and do some archaeological sightseeing. I'm usually more a beach person, but something was drawing me there. And by the time when I boarded the bus to go there, I literally still thought I was going there to see the ruins. And then synchronicities happened. So I sat next to a guy from New York City. He told me his life story, crazy guy, had been a drug addict, had been in jail, and really rough story, but was on his way of bettering himself. And he was also on his way to visit his friend, the shaman in the jungle, and invited me to come along. And then my rational mind, one side was like, no, you can do that, Katja. You just heard what he told you. He seems nice, but that's not a good idea. You won't have service there. You won't be able to ask for help. Like, no. But then my intuition was like, no, go. Everything will be fine. That's exactly the experience you've been asking for. So I kind of debated for the next hours on the bus, and I decided to go, not knowing what to expect. I ended up staying for a few days with a shaman in the jungle and experienced plant medicine for the first time, like ayahuasca. I had never really done any drugs before. I maybe have like experience with weed, but that's it. Never really also felt drawn to chemical substances. I lived in Berlin for 12 years, so there's like a big drug scene. But I always knew, no, it's not good for me. Let's stay away. But with plant medicine, it was like a yes, a full yes. So I had an incredible time there, really, really deep, insightful, meaningful ceremonies, and also got some really serious insights on my life and where I wasn't aligned. Back then, there were a few topics and areas in my life where I wasn't feeling like, okay, super fulfilled and happy. And I came out of that like time, and I knew, okay, I need to take some serious decisions. In my case, that meant I have to leave that career, even if that's fun, but I need to do something more meaningful, and that also involves spiritual work. I had a big spiritual side to me that I never really like dared to show or express, and that really wanted to come alive. Mm-hmm. And the other big insight was, back then I was in a long-term relationship, and we were kind of, on different trajectories of what we wanted in life. And I had to admit to myself that I also have to, leave that, even if I love the person, and I could have easily done that for the next 40 years, but I could have never turned into the person that was inside of me that wanted to come out in the context of this relationship. So like came back home, thought it through, and followed up on those insights, and took some big decisions in life. It's a little bit like suicide of your old identity. Suddenly you're like, everything you were identifying with or what you knew was gone. And that took me in a deep, deep, deep transformation process of really getting to know myself better and what I wanted in life. But also it showed me how powerful it is to really take the time and integrate properly. On that journey, I had great support. So I really went deep. And in that time, took on one last corporate job to buy myself a year of time, but I already knew that's my exit job. And at that time, I also came across transformational coaching with Animas. Really resonated.
That's where I've seen your name around. Yes. For a while, Facebook kept wanting us to be friends. And I'm like, it rings a bell, that name somewhere. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So I enrolled for the transformational coaching program and didn't think back then that this would be what I'm doing next. But I just it felt aligned. And over the course then of the next month, I really noticed, I'm enjoying this a lot. I mean, I had coached people before in the corporate context, but it was always a little bit different and performance driven, and not so so much around purpose or existential questions. And then after the year, I'm like, okay, I think that's what I'm going to do next. This feels aligned. So I started coaching, started my own business right before the pandemic, 2 months before. Had a few different things lined up. So all the all the contracts that I had, all the jobs and gigs were suddenly gone because a lot was in person. So I'm like, okay, what am I doing now? And the shaman I had my time with in Mexico back then, he and this is years before, he said, yeah, you're not new to this. I don't have to tell you. And I'm like, yeah, I know. It's it felt like coming home. And he offered me to kind of teach me what he knows if I wanted to embrace the shamanic path a little bit more. And I knew it would be waiting on my way, but not right away. And then a few months in that time, I was like, okay, now after 2-3 years, I feel ready to go. So I called him up and said, hey, I'm coming to Mexico. planning to spend a month or two. Those turned into 4 months. So I studied intensely, like with him, kind of living as a spiritual hermit, and fully like going into the deep process, working with ayahuasca, but also different other master plans, and also learning a lot about integration and going deep. And at the end of those 4 months, I knew, okay, I can't go back and live in Germany anymore. Way too much masculine energy, way too much structure. I love the environment and culture in Mexico. I'll move there. So, and then once I had made that decision, back then I also didn't have a place or a community. So once I had made that decision, like within a few weeks, everything aligned. I found a great community of people. I found a wonderful place to stay. So the universe just made it really easy for me. And I flew back to Berlin, packed up my things, and moved to Mexico. And that's where I'm still at since 3 years, and very happy. And of course, people who followed me along on the journey, they were very intrigued by my experience with plant medicine and kept asking me about it. Like, hey, I also want to try, and could you maybe connect me with someone, and so on. And this is how I like got into that work, because people were approaching me and I was like sharing my experience and expertise, and also seeing how within that space there's a lack of like intention, also proper preparation and integration. And then over the course of the time, I started also curating retreats for people. This could be one-on-one retreats or group retreats where people come, and plant medicine is part of it, but it's not the main focus. So it's more a deeper process into your own personal development, into really connecting with yourself and going deeper, looking at certain questions that you have in your life, looking at life transitions and what's next for you, and using psychedelics and plant medicine in that case as a kind of like a gateway to elicit more insights for further healing and so on. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's how I ended up doing what I'm doing. And it, in my opinion, it goes really well with the transformational work. I mean, I have to say, I don't think plant medicine or psychedelics is for everyone, and that everyone should do it. And in a way, I see it with kind of, on one hand, it's really positive that it's slowly becoming destigmatized and there's so much attention to it. But at the same time, I'm also seeing the tendency that it can get a hype and people come with the wrong intentions. They just come for, like all my friends did it, I now also want to know what it's about. So I try to be really mindful also when I encounter people and tell them, hey, it's a big thing. For me, it like changed my life. For you, it might be the same, or it might not be as impactful, but you kind of need to be ready to embrace whatever it wants to show you and to be able to receive that. If it's just like curiosity and you end up getting an insight or seeing something that you didn't want to see, and you don't have the right psychological framework to understand it and the right coping mechanisms and support system to handle and integrate it, it might be more difficult in the end. So make it really a conscious decision if you want to do that or not, and know why you're doing it.
Mm-hmm. How do you screen clients? So how do you make sure that it's a good match for you, with whom you want to work?
Yeah, so I have like intense preparation conversations with them where I check in, like, okay, what is your intention? What's your background? Just getting to know them and see where they're at, and what question they come with, what challenge they come with, and what they like try to where they try to go, and also what their expectations are in terms of, how psychedelics might support them with that. And I always tell people it's not the magic pill that will like solve all your problems with one cup or one ceremony. It's kind of a gateway that can give you deeper insights, but the actual work starts afterwards. So if you're not willing to do the work, or willing and are committed to doing that, don't expect that miraculously from one day to the next, like everything has solved itself. So yeah, and once you have like deeper, honest conversations with people, you kind of get a feel for where they're at. Also, what what's their mental health history, and of course, with certain things in your mental health history, it's not a good idea to do it. So I also speak with people openly about it, so they are aware of risks, and then they can make an informed decision. Sometimes also people found me for kind of more emergency integration sessions that had done ceremonies in different contexts and had a really bad experience, and then they're trying to cope with it and can't, and then they somehow find me or someone recommends me. And when I speak with them and hear like how they went in, and I'm like, wow, it's no wonder that this happened, because there were so many red flags. So for me, the intentional preparation is a crucial point, and also really screening to make sure that it's super safe and that people are really aware of what they're going into.
Yeah, could you tell us a bit more about what some of those red flags might be for you? It seems to be a conversational and probably also, I mean, you're quite an intuitive person. So when you say deep conversations to prepare, I'm sure you pick up a lot. I wonder now, when you reflect on it, is there some sort of mental checklist? Are there questions you would always ask at some point or another? And what might be some of those red flags that would help a coach make those decisions?
You mean when vetting someone?
Yeah. Vetting is a terrible word, I think, but
or
when having that conversation to figure out, is that a good match?
If it makes sense. So when I'm speaking with people, what I'm trying to tune in is where they're at in terms of self-reflection and coping mechanisms. So if you have someone in front of you who just blames the entire outside world and then doesn't really take responsibility for what's going on for them, I already know it's someone in a victim mindset. Is really difficult to bring to a point of really going into those deeper reflections and moments where you honestly have to admit something to you in the face of plant medicine. So I'm kind of checking that, but mostly it's quite intuitive. I don't have a certain catalog of questions in the conversation. I'll get a feel for. Sometimes I also ask directly to hear about what people are struggling with, to get an idea what their coping mechanisms are, what expectations they also have coming in or wanting to do it. What are they imagining? Then what brought them in the first place, the intention. So it's a variety of different things, but I don't follow one strict catalog of questions.
Mm-hmm. Could you give us an example of somebody you chose not to work with, perhaps?
Yeah, I had a conversation with someone, and they wanted to come to a retreat, but it would have been the first time, and they were also in the conversation. I perceived them as not really grounded and all over the place and unsure of things and this and that. And then there were other things going on in their life where I felt, wow, that's a lot. And I intuitively felt it's not or at least not the right time. And I honestly said, you know what, hearing what you shared with me, check in with yourself. It might not be the right time yet. And maybe it's good to also start with something smaller or different. If you have someone who's never experienced any psychedelics before, and then they immediately want to go for DMT, instead of maybe starting with a microdose of mushrooms and getting a feeling for how that lands in your body, how that feels, how your perception is different, to ease into it and become secure in yourself, can be quite overwhelming to go from zero to to the max.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Julia, before you take this forward, I just want to kind of highlight that what we offer and the kind of journeys we take people on, that's quite a range, right? So you can think of it as, well, is this coaching or is this therapy, right? Somebody who's not quite got the resources or tends to blame others, you mentioned tending to take this kind of victim stance. yes, I'm sure there's plenty of people listening to this who would say, oh yeah, that's exactly what they need to be confronted with by the medicine. But that's a different journey. It might not be a coaching journey, right? So I think choosing our clients to make sure it's a good fit for how we work and where we take people and the kind of journeys that we are on might be different to a therapeutic journey, or might be different to a coach who does extremely deep work, for example. I mean, I'm sure, you can do extremely deep work, but so it's not a quality about the depth, but like, what do you expect your clients to bring into your coaching journey, and how can you help them make the most of that? I think it's a really important one for coaches to ask themselves.
Yeah, it's super, super important. In my opinion as well. And also if you, for example, look at when you have retreats, like where are people at? I mean, there's also so much value in like psychedelics in the therapeutical setting, but it might not be the right thing to bring in one person that is like really needing therapy into a context or a container where there's other people that are more in the coaching space that are whose intention is to thrive and maybe connect more with their mission or their purpose, rather than for the first time in their life, like facing all the darkness they have avoided until then. So really like seeing where's also kind of the limit of where I as a coach can support, and where I also feel like good with and like trained for, and where does it like maybe where's therapy maybe the better option. That's always a really important one to consider as well.
Julia, I have tons of questions, but what would you want to ask?
I would be interested, like, what do you do if you realize within, like, maybe the first session with plant medicines that it's not only coaching, but it is something that goes in direction of therapy? What oftentimes happens that people just are not aware of what is lying deep down there in the dark, waiting to be unleashed. And how do you proceed? Do you have a referral network, or are you also a therapist so that you can go until a certain point, maybe a bit more than just a coach would do? So how do you do that?
I'm not an officially trained therapist, but I know some techniques, and I'm pretty good at also holding intense, energetic, like containers where a lot of things come up for people. So in that moment, I'm good to work with it, but it's also like not an area I would want to choose in when you do the work that comes afterwards. So if someone needs therapy afterwards, or it like is clear that therapy would be beneficial, then I'm happy to, point them to a person that is great at doing that, because therapy in the end is like very different from coaching. And I really like the way how you go about coaching and all the processes there. So of course, if it happens and if support is needed, I can do that in this moment. But then I will also make sure that if someone needs therapy, I'll provide them with at least like a helpful contact to get that. Maybe then in addition to coaching is also great. I've had some clients who are like doing both, but definitely not trying to squeeze that into a coaching container.
Yeah, and I hear that quite a lot from coaches, and I think this distinction is quite important, that when somebody's having an intense moment or intense experience, or a door into depth comes up, and might be quite emotionally overwhelming, and so a lot of, as you say, energy comes up. It's not that you need to close that door immediately and say, oh, no, you need to go to therapy.
Exactly.
But I think it's good practice that we hold that for a moment. It's a difference if we hold intense energy and then, once it's settled a bit, we figure out, well, where are you going to take this next and really work with it? One thing is to hold it. The other one is to work with it in that moment or over the next 10 sessions or 10 months or 10 years, so. And on that note, I think something I wanted to ask kind of takes us a few steps back. But since you just mentioned coaching, what is your frame on coaching, right? I kind of know the training that you've had because I know the school quite well.
Yeah.
So, but transformational coaching, transformative coaching, I mean, there's so many different frameworks and perspectives on it. So I wonder, to you, what is coaching, and how, if at all, has your view on what coaching is shifted since you've trained?
Yeah, well, since I've trained, I mean, there's so many like nuances and differences, and what's mostly known as coaching for people is like many different things. So that's why it can also get confusing because it's not regulated. I would say what I'm like doing more, and this is where the difference from coaching to therapy to mentoring to maybe consulting or advising comes in. What I'm doing is more mentorship. It will have elements of coaching, like phases where, it's purely eliciting the questions or the answers from someone by asking the right questions. But what clients are also very often asking me to do is share my own like experience or share what I'm perceiving, how I'm seeing it. And this is definitely not clean coaching, how they train it in this exact program. So how I practice it is a mix of different things and modalities. And
sorry, I hate to interrupt, but before we go there, can I jump in for a moment? Because that decision to bring the mentorship element in, right? I mean, many coaches will recognize that. We seem to have relevant experience here, and the client is asking us for it. At that point, every coach needs to make a decision, right? Am I leaving the facilitative coaching frame and kind of go and share my experience? Might I move more into a mentorship frame? But whether you call it mentoring or coaching, I mean, many coaches do mentoring and still call it coaching, right? Many mentors I know, they coach and they still call it mentoring. But at that moment when you were asked, and how did that decision come about, that you're consciously bringing your own experience in and decided that that is going to be more relevant than to continue to ask questions and continue to tap into the client's resources?
Well, I have this conversation like in the beginning. I explain to people like what's coaching, what's mentoring, etc. And we agree upon like what they want for the collaboration. But then, sometimes someone like says they want coaching, but then they keep insisting on or asking, so like, how did you do it back then? Or what's your opinion on that? And then I'm super clear and like transparently communicating that we're now leaving the coaching like framework. Then I'll say, okay, I know there's interest, like depending on, I either like try to guide it back, or if they really want it, then I'm like, but I mean, I can like share this, but I want you to know that this is now not coaching anymore. This is like mentoring. I'm now sharing my perspective. It's just my perspective, my experience. It might not be the best for you. I want it to bring it back to you again afterwards. So you can see what's the best solution for you. So to be really clear and not like water it down, or if you don't address it, then it's confusing people. So I'm really kind of a little stop sign, like, hey, okay, let's zoom out for a moment. We can now move into mentoring for a while, but then let's go back to coaching and really kind of being clear about those like different elements.
That makes perfect sense. I wonder, at what point did you decide that they ask and you then choose to contract to leave that frame for a moment? Because you could say, I hear your question and I'm super curious why you're looking outside for answers that I believe are in you, right? Or whatever words a facilitative coach might respond to that, right? Because yes, I can share my experience, but chances is my experience won't be your experience, or maybe there's parallels in there. So I'm curious why you decided to offer something outside of what we have now framed as the coaching and go into the mentoring.
Yeah, mainly it was like in situations where there was like something logistical, or it was around like plant medicine and how to approach certain things and logistics, where it wasn't so much a question about that you can come up with the answer for yourself, because it was purely more information based. Mm-hmm. So from that angle, this is how the entryway was into mentoring.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I know I have asked myself that question, especially in the preparation. Integration, I think I don't ask myself the questions at all, because it's really focusing in on the client. Yeah. But especially when I help people prepare, I am often tempted to be like, well, read this book and that book, and this is my experience, or, ask this question or that question. And in this space, I consciously don't, right? And I contract in the beginning quite clearly that, yeah, there's a few information that I might share. Like I would, for example, recommend the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, Fadiman, as like a starting point for someone's, learning journey of how might they prepare themselves. But when it comes to plant medicine or any kind of psychedelic substances, I feel there's so much responsibility that we carry when we give information, because we still don't know whether these informations are good information, because we know so little about these things. I mean, we can know a lot, but like also depends on what our frame of knowledge is, right? Yeah. We've certainly not studied them a lot. So I wonder how you carry the responsibility of taking a mentoring role in your coaching.
Well, I'm always quite like hesitant when people ask about like, how's the experience? I'll let them know, first, every experience is very individual and different. And I would advise you to not like want to know too much about it, because if I now share how my experience was, you build the expectation of that it has to be exactly like that, and then you're sitting there waiting for it to happen, and you might be missing what's supposed to happen for you. So I'm like pushing back, but sometimes people just want to have a little bit like of affirmation, or if they have certain fears, like how many people vomit or have other things happen, to reassure them a bit. Sometimes it can happen, but it doesn't mean that it will happen to you. So, and from that point, then going into working with that fear of why is the fear there, that it could happen? What's like the worst thing behind that, and dismantling that. So, but it's definitely a big responsibility, and that's why I also feel I don't want to lead people in those things. So when people ask me about my first experiences, for example, or other things, then I'm very private, or at least I let them know, hey, I could share, but I don't see the point right now, because I don't want you to get influenced. It's a different conversation if you're like with a group of experienced people and it's more in the integration phase, and you're kind of sharing with each other what came through for everyone and what they experienced. But in that individual container setting, I don't want to influence them too much. But at the same time, I want to provide them with as many information they need to make a conscious decision and have a safe setting, and go in with a feeling of safety.
So what sort of fine line? So what sort of information would you share, and what sort of information wouldn't you? I mean, you hinted on a few already, right?
Yeah, so I would, for example, not share like how my personal journeys were with different types of plant medicine, like what happened for me, and what the sensations were, and so on. Because then people focus on that. You already see that a lot. They come in, they have maybe talked with other people or heard reports about certain like trips, and then they're like, oh yeah, this is probably I'm seeing all the colors and so on, or I will experience synesthesia. Yeah, could be, but it doesn't have to. So those are information which I don't like to share. But other information, when it's about, okay, what are things that like have come up for people in ceremony, or things that have happened, does it not work for some people? What if you do you feel sick longer, and so on? So those things where they can gauge, do I really want to take that step and make that decision? Like in terms of what does it need for a good preparation? Like how should I really avoid certain foods, or how strict am I on certain things? This is something I do tend to share, and then whatever is like personal or would affect them in expectations or how they perceive things, this is what I try to avoid. I don't know if that makes it clearer.
Yeah.
How's it for you?
I'm just very aware that I've been talking a lot again after I said, oh, I asked one more question. I asked like 15. Julia, what's on your mind?
I was wondering, what is closer to your heart, like the mentoring or the coaching? So what comes more natural to you, or what would you prefer if you could prefer something?
That really depends on what the person and what they come with and the specific question. But I do love, what gives me the most like intrinsic joy is not someone like, I don't know, validates my experience or anything, but seeing that like spark in someone's eye when they like suddenly get it, or they come up with a solution for themselves, or you notice, oh, now a different like part of their being has come alive. So in that sense, I would say it's the, and that's more in the coaching space. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And maybe another question, because that's something that I ask myself a lot. It's about like cultural appropriation. Mm-hmm. That we are both German, or all three of us are actually German, going to and other countries white. And super white and learning about plant medicines. And I always ask myself, like, how can we work with plants without having a big problem with it, if you know what I mean. Like, you are not becoming an indigenous person, and there is so much cultural background there, and there's so much connection with nature there, and all these things. And what I see now in this whole area is that there are so many people now starting working with plant medicine, and I think there are a lot, at least, who have no clue about how it works really in the countries where the medicine comes from, and how the different cultures work with it, with the same medicine in a different way, and all this. So I'm always thinking about having that in mind, and I'm interested about your view on that, since you're also working with plant medicine.
Yeah, and I have a very specific view on it. When I say working, it's not that I'm facilitating the ceremonies. For me, even after those 4 months of shamanic initiation, I very clearly knew it's not my role to be the medicine carrier. I'm the guide, and I help people before and after and during as well. So I bring in shamans and like indigenous people that have learned this, that have learned all the wisdom, got it from their lineage, really are dedicated to doing that work. And this is where I connect people. So for retreats, I will have facilitators coming in to do the ceremony. I'm in the ceremony with them. I'm there all the time. And in that context, being kind of the bridge, or someone with the same similar cultural background, gives some people a feeling of safety, because first, there's no language barriers, and they make sure, or they know that you also kind of understand their way of living and their situation. But they also see that I trust the people I bring in to work with. So with that, it makes them feel more safe. But I'm not say I work with it. It's not that I'm, sitting there and facilitating the ayahuasca ceremony or singing the Icarus. I have so much respect for this work, and I see how, even if you learned about it for a few months or a few years, it's very different when you grow up with it, and when it's part of your complete being, part of your heritage. And I really have so much respect for that, and that's why I have for myself decided I'm the guide. I'm not the medicine carrier.
Mm-hmm. And do you have substances, like medicines that you yourself work with, if you want to share it?
You mean where I facilitate?
Yeah.
So what I sometimes do is, but then I don't call it a ceremony. It's more like a guided journey with mushrooms, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then it's also clear that it's a different setting and what the role is. Yeah. And then, of course, for myself, when I'm just by myself, I work with different plants.
Yeah.
So now we have before, during, and after on the table, right? Which is, I think, generally how we could divide the spaces when it comes to coaching with or around psychedelic experiences. Do you, like, how much, if any, coaching skills do you use when you are present during the experience?
Well, in the ceremony, I would say it's not so much coaching as like space holding for people. Space holding and making sure they what they need, they have it to feel safe, to be good. In some cases, it depends on what the setting is. Let's say if I'm with someone one-on-one, and I also know that the person is like experienced with that type of medicine, and if you're in the right part of the journey, something like coaching conversations can be super fruitful because the conversations just bring up a very different level of insights. So in that context, if it's agreed upon before, then I might do that. But in general, when you're in a ceremony also with more people, then it's rather there's like no speaking. It's you might only share what's relevant to share for housekeeping, or if someone needs immediate support. But it's not that you sit there and have a coaching conversation amongst the group.
Yeah,
ceremony. So the during.
Yeah, the challenge that I have with during, like, I don't sit with people. I don't want to be present during the I mean, that's not true. Part of me really would like to be present. Part of me really wants to be there, right? And hold that space. Part of it is there's a level of experience that I feel I would want to have before I sit with people during experiences. But the main reason professionally is that I would find it so tempting, and I would imagine that the journeyer would find it so tempting if we already spend time preparing for this, and then I'm there, and maybe the peak has faded, right? And they're able to talk. We had Fernando had the other. He said, he asked them, when does the integration process start? And they said, as soon as they're able and willing to talk. And I'm like, whoa, they're still very much like under the influence, right? So yeah, I guess technically vulnerable, very malleable, very suggestible in many ways. And that on some level is tempting because you could do so much positive influencing, but at the same time, there's so much responsibility that we're holding. So for me, it's the temptation on probably both sides to engage in a conversation while they're still under the influence. So I wonder how you navigate that.
I'm very clear on that. So I even encourage people before they go into ceremony. I give the recommendation to, hey, afterwards, it might be very tempting, after the ceremony ended, to just go chit chat with everyone and share oh my God, I saw this, I saw that. But I tell people, actually try to not do that. Try to just be with you and your experience, maybe to journal, let it integrate overnight. And then the next day we'll meet anyways and we'll do a sharing circle, because I know that you're so open. And I also explain, I don't want your experience to be influenced by anyone else's sharing in that moment. Once it's so fresh, first let it settle a bit for you. And then you can go and share. And then you can go and listen to someone else's shares. But keep it as pristine as possible in you, because sometimes, also over the first night or when you journaled, perspectives change or new insights come, and you would share very differently than right after. So yeah, that's I would not personally go into coaching conversation right after. I mean, it's different if someone has been really struggling and feels they need one-on-one attention and sharing, then I'll go and listen. But I also would not take it too much into coaching. Then it would be more kind of to make sure they can self-regulate and get to a point where they can contemplate and self-reflect.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example of the kind of information that I would share, right? Some guidance on well, what happens after the experience? I think they can also get that kind of guidance when you, ask them and be curious about who could you talk to, who had a lot of experiences. What books could you read, or, where could you find information in how to best transition from the experience into an integration session? I don't need to give that information as a coach, but that's a kind of example that's really helpful information to share. And
yeah, because sometimes people just need, if they need to read an entire book for it, they might miss it and then still don't know in a specific moment what's the best thing for them.
Yeah, so the people they have access to, just give them very different information than maybe the kind of information that would really help them.
Yeah, that's true as well. So we do have a lot of responsibility, and my intention is always to make sure someone goes in with as much intention as possible, as prepared as possible, at the same time with the least fear in them, fear of the unknown. I also, in my retreats, I do certain preparation exercises to really help people self-regulate and befriend the unknown before ceremony, so they have this experience when they go into it.
Mm-hmm. Julia, I feel there's some stuff behind that.
For sure. But I'm
going to take the sun out of my face for a moment. I'll be right back.
Yes. Stop for a moment.
Yes.
There we are again. I was wondering, if the people you are working with, is it you're putting all them then into a retreat, or is it there's a retreat and people are coming and a few of them are also your coaching clients? How does it work?
It can be a mix. So when I host retreats, I curate them, I design them, I also facilitate them. So some of the guests that might be joining might already be coaching clients, and they come for it. Others are just coming for the retreat, but then we also speak about, continuing with the integration coaching afterwards. So it's a mix.
Yeah. And how does the legal status impact your work? Because it's so different in so many different countries.
I know. Yeah, that's kind of always a little bit of a gray zone. So of course, there are certain risks to everything. So I share that transparently, and also people sign waivers. And in terms of retreats or facilitating ceremonies, because I'm not doing that myself, and bringing someone in, it's slightly different, but you need to be on top of changing regulations and what you can actually do.
Yeah. I think it's impacting a lot of what you want to do or would want to do, and
and where you want to do it and so on.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need to work around things, when it's still a little bit pioneering work, because it's the entire landscape is being regulated. People are slowly opening up to it. So sometimes you can't do things how you would ideally want them to do, or where you would want them to do. But there's always a solution.
I guess that's the added risk factor when you're involved in the ceremonies. And I think it can be a bit of a dilemma for practicing coaches practicing in this space, is that, for example, I decided to just keep that line very clear, not just for the reasons that I mentioned earlier in terms of responsibility and in terms of, not wanting to be tempted to intervene, but also because professionally, it's a much easier split. Legally, it's a much easier split. If I'm not involved, if I'm not present there, integration conversations cannot possibly be illegal, right? Somebody comes in with whatever experience they've had. That's an experience that has happened, and you help them to make the best out of that. Maybe turn a difficult, a challenging experience, a painful one, into one that feels constructive and transformational. Helping somebody prepare, that already starts the gray area, right? Because you could be seen as colluding. So I tell all of my clients, right, do this in a legal, safe setting, right? But I do trust you that you do this in a legal and safe setting, right? I can help you to figure out questions you can ask to make sure that this is legal and safe. But ultimately, my clients make a decision of what they do with that. I remember the first time we had that conversation, and they were looking into retreats in the Netherlands that were legal, and there were psychotherapists on site, and it was a fantastic setting. And then they came back like 2 months later and said, "Oh yeah, hi, I'm back, and I've done it, in our bedroom with my wife, sitting." And I'm, So yeah, not my preferred setting. But I do know people do that sometimes. I wouldn't want to encourage people to do that. Because I think legal and safe is probably the best way. But then you could argue that it's not always the best way for people. Some might not be able to afford and otherwise wouldn't have access to that. But, as a professional, that's where I kind of draw the line. But it's difficult because if you're not involved in ceremonies, I know that the coaches who have the most work in the psychedelic space are the coaches who are present during the experiences or involved in the retreats, because who's your first pick of somebody to integrate with or help you prepare than the people who are involved in the place that you're going to be going.
Yeah. So, although I don't see that much of, you need to be there in order to continue coaching with them. What's more important for me is to also make sure that the ceremony or the ceremonial environment, that what happens there is also safe. Because if you're just doing the prep and after, it's always kind of a black box. You don't know where they really end up going with and what's happening there. It might not be safe. So in a way, when you're there, and as I said, I'm not facilitating the ceremony, but yeah, I'm present, and that also gives people a feeling of safety, because sometimes I even have people asking that. So will you also then be there with us, or do you just bring us to the person who's facilitating it and then you're leaving us? So it gives them a feeling of, no, there's actually really someone I can rely on, that I have built a trusted relationship with, and if I need to, I can count on Katja. So energetically, it's I know there's a legal side to it, but energetically, this is a very very different situation.
Yeah, I know what you mean. This is what I'm offering when somebody does plan a journey somewhere and they want to take the coach with them. I would accompany them there, or I would meet them there, and they would know that I'm around, but I wouldn't be in the ceremony. And again, part of me would really like to, but then there's too many factors that for me, I decided personally and professionally, there's a professional angle on this as well. I'm not going to go there. Maybe in the future, at some point I will. But kind of I think every coach has to draw their own lines. And I guess I would encourage coaches that start out to err on the side of caution and then go further and further into the space. Because it can be risky, right? Where you're opening up a lot and clients open up a lot. And things can get really wild, while somebody's having these kind of experiences. So
wild things.
Yeah. So Julia, unless there's something in that space that you wanted to kind of dig a little bit deeper on, I would be so curious about some of those wilder experiences that you have encountered, and as a coach, how you have responded to them. But yeah, Julia, might great. Be more open doors.
No,
yeah?
That's okay.
Cool.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Katja.
Oh, okay. I thought you want to ask a question. I have responded to them. Yeah, I mean, it very often happens that someone just goes nuts and screams and releases a lot in the ceremony, and then the other participants, they are exposed to that and don't know how to handle that, and just being there to help hold the space. And in a way, it's more energetic in how you react. So then you notice people might be watching you or seeing how you react to gauge if the situation is now normal or not, if it happens in their first ceremony. And then also for the person that is going in the intense expression of feeling kind of okay to do that now if they feel they want to do that. So of course the shamans, the facilitators are there and they're supporting with those processes. But when you're the kind of trusted guide to help with the preparation, people will also kind of like secretly, subconsciously check in. Okay, is everything still going how it's supposed to go? Am I still safe? Is everything still in kind of green light? And in that like sense, making sure that that this feeling of safety is continuously provided. I'm observing a lot in the room and what's going on, or sometimes also outside. You might have disturbances or things that are happening. So it's more like also logistically making sure that it's always like safe for people. And then, of course, if someone like goes nuts, to not let them run out or into the forest, but really contain it and remind people of what rules have been set before. If the facilitator sets the rule for, hey, let's all stay together, let's not venture out into different directions. And if you see someone like coming or going out, to then keeping an eye on them and checking on them. So then it's more, I would say, trip sitter role.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder, what, if anything, do you capture or take notes on, or like as you're building a bridge into the integration stage, when you're present during an experience? In some ways, you must have your coach hat on, right? Or your mentoring hat, or your facilitator hat. Do you capture anything to take on? Or how does the integration process then work? If you could talk us through that, feel free to maybe bring an example of how that might have happened. I know it might be different every time.
Yeah, so I'm not taking notes or anything. I'm just like basically observing and capturing for myself what's going on. So in the on the next day, or when we go into the integration and sharing process, if people refer to a certain point, that I know like which moment in that time they meant what happened for them. Mm-hmm. But it's not that I'm like sitting there with my notebook and writing down, the person A screamed a lot this name, or for person B it was a lot of like crying. No, but more to have an idea when the group will talk about the ceremony and what happened and what had been going on energetically, to be able to relate to that.
So you might have multiple people that you're working with on an integration journey based on a single experience in a ceremony, in a group?
Yeah, so for the retreats, it's a group container. So people come together for a week. We prepare. There's different other like modalities, more coaching, group coaching setups, but also then different body work activities and different practices that teach them how to self-regulate. And then the ceremony is one part of it, but most things happen in the group, even if there's individual treatment sessions. And then also the integration happens, or the sharing circle happens as a group. So yeah,
so it would be difficult to sit there and really focus in on one person's journey, kind of picking up on but part of me, when I imagine, well, what if it would be like if I were to sit with people, I would probably want to capture that they've mentioned a name, and then many of us will know what it's like.
But I don't write it down. I'll write it. So I'll definitely do that. But it's also not that I give them a report the next day. It's more when when the conversation goes there, then I might like bring it up or ask about it, but only like if it's relevant in that context. But I'm not taking notes or minutes or anything.
Right. I don't even remember what has happened. So maybe then it wasn't really, really important.
Exactly.
That's exactly why I've had a number of experiences. I don't remember what it is that it was, but I remember the experience of, I've just had this huge insight, and I forgot, and I knew it was huge, and I knew it shifted something, but don't know what it was anymore. And then sometimes I got a bit stuck, like trying to chase what it was that just shifted. And then over the years, I just trust that something shifted and that was meaningful, right? But
that's a difference, like between, like, call it fermentation, that is like a more passive integration than the active integration afterwards. But there are things that just happen in the process, and you don't need to really remember it, how it was and what it did. But it's like on a subconscious level, there are changes.
Yeah,
you don't need to know it. You don't need to work on it.
I'm just thinking, right, how do I make the most out of this experience and this journey? And then I'm thinking, well, if I sit there with eye shades on and I had this moment, but I know that I'll have these moments, it's likely that this will happen again, because usually that happens for me quite a lot. I could just like say a few words out loud as I'm experiencing it. And the coach might pick that up and bring it back and be curious. At some point you said this and it seemed profound, and I might have completely forgotten about it already, but I might be so thankful to be able to pick up on that. I mean, in a group setting, it's more difficult. But that's why I thought quite a bit of the added value of having the coach sitting with you might lie.
I mean, the risk is that you as the coach then interpret something into it. And as Julia said, they might not even remember it. I also had like settings just with one client where they wanted to like take notes, or they said, hey, can you also take a notebook just in case I say something really important? Can you write it down for me if I can write it down? And I was thinking to myself, yeah, I mean, I don't think you're going to take notes, but let me just like say yes, so you feel like safe, and if you want me to do that, we can do that. And then of course, you know, he didn't even one time think of writing into his notebook, and the next day he was even laughing at himself having the intention of bringing it, but that was his process he needed to go through.
I've had some hilarious moments trying to decipher my notes, because I took quite a few. Quite a few. I took on quite a few journeys. I took notes, and I remember that at some point, just the trying to take the note was so difficult. And if I could have just said it, it would have been so much easier, you know, instead of like in the dark trying to figure out the hand coordination and what are letters again. And that was.
Brings you oftentimes back to your head. So I tell them not to do it. Maybe really in the end, if they feel like in the last part, if you feel like writing down something, okay. But in the middle, it's like you bring in your mind again, and that sometimes it also disturbs the process. And I think it's also different with which substance you work. Mm-hmm. So I think for like ayahuasca, it's very unlikely that you should have your notebook in the ceremony, and oftentimes you wouldn't be able to find it.
Yeah,
to write it. So
people who try to take the notes in their phone, like that's also one thing.
Oh my God!
When I say, don't do it, like just don't do it, don't bring it. But one time the person didn't like listen to it, and if you've ever watched like a technical device while you're on a journey, it's not a pleasant experience. So
yeah, and it's most likely bound to fail.
Into your head again, yeah.
Notes on paper, that did help me. I mean, there's times when clearly there's no point, and clearly that's not going to work. So, and sometimes also, yeah, maybe that could have been a distraction, but also at times they were really, really helpful for me to pick up on, because they did take me back to a place that wasn't in my conscious awareness, but it was easily easily to reconnect to when I had like even just one word, you know, or something.
When it comes to that, I always kind of tell people, check in with yourself. Why are you doing that? Are you doing that out of fear or out of love? If you feel you need to take notes because you want to make the most out of the journey and you're afraid you're losing some insights, then it's coming from a place of fear, then I would challenge it. But if you're like in the ceremony and you just feel that urge to, I need to sit up now and write a few words down, then do that. But then it's not coming from this, I have to or I should. And that's a big difference.
Yeah. I feel there's a lot of trusting the process, which, you know, in coaching that happens a lot. Trust the process. If you don't pick up on something, it'll come back. If it's important, it'll come back. You know, just hold space, trust the process. And I think in the psychedelic space, there's a lot of that, probably a lot more than in coaching.
Even more, yeah. I call it learning through osmosis, that you can be sure that whatever is meant for you, whatever you need to remember, you just soak it up. Your subconscious, your conscious soaks it up, and you have it, you know it. So you don't need to be afraid of missing out on something important, because that's just creating another fear loop again.
Yeah. On the other hand, I also have a bit of a problem with that, because sometimes like coaching is like, people say, oh, it's quite magic as a process. And I would say, well, I know what you mean, but really it's not magic, because we have understood why it works to hold space, or why, certain styles of coaching have certain outcomes or likely. So I think there's merit in looking at what these processes are. I totally understand where someone is, well, this is a sacred space. Don't try to understand it. Just let Mother Ayahuasca do her magic, and you see what you need to be seen. But then when we do take a more arguably Western kind of perspective on this, we study these substances for a reason in these experiences. And I think it's helpful to study coaching in those relations too. That, yes, I totally respect if somebody says, well, it's an intuitive journey, I hold space and then magic happens. On the other hand, I'm like, yeah, but how? Because some of the magic loses its magic when we understand it. But then a lot of the magic is recreatable and stops being magic, and it just becomes an effective process when we do understand it.
Yeah, I would say it's like a very individual decision for everyone, and what the person also feels they want, they need. So there's no like right or wrong answer. And I always keep coming back to my own intuition in one moment, and in one setting, it might feel like the right thing to like do one thing, and in another setting, it might intuitively feel, I don't know, maybe then good to write something down. So I'm also trusting my inner knowing on this, because so far it's been always very on point and very helpful. So I don't try to, and I'm a very like mind-driven person. I needed to train myself out of that to really coming more into my body and listening to the wisdom of my body and what it tells me. So I'm not trying to question certain impulses or things in certain moments. And that's also what I invite other people to do. Many of my clients, they are, also more on the rational, mind-driven side, want to get more in touch with their intuition, want to get more in touch with their emotions. So then, like, giving them the permission or inviting them to, hey, no, don't worry in that moment. Just like bring it back to yourself and check in with yourself what you feel is the right thing for you to do, not what you think is the right thing to do, but what you feel in that moment. That's very helpful.
Right. Yeah. And I would think that probably people who seek the support of a coach may be more mind-driven than people who seek a spiritual psychedelic guide to support them on that kind of journey. So, I mean, I know coaching has evolved a lot, and there's a lot of very intuitive, heart-centered, spiritual coaches even, that are really no different to a spiritual guide, but they call themselves coaches now for whatever reason. But I would think that people who approach coaches, they might be more on that, more in one camp than the other. Do you know what I mean? I'm not sure.
We're also multidimensional. So in one situation, someone might want to have coaching for that, but then in other situations, they just want to like have someone hold space for them spiritually. So I wouldn't generalize it.
Oh yeah, and I mean every coach knows that often we just hold space.
And it's oftentimes that people come with maybe a coaching question, or coming to retreats who are less ceremonial, spiritual, and then they find their spirituality in it, or their at least they open up a door where they want to go through and have a deeper look, even though they have never called themselves spiritual or anything like that before. I think that's also interesting to see that then coming from this rational mind and going more into intuition and trying that out more.
Yeah, I love when I see that happen. It's then there's like an inner part in me that's like,
Yay!
I think it's clear if you're watching this, just to look at all our faces just now lighting up when we imagine those moments or remembering them.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah. Where next, Julia?
Is there something you would have wished you would have known when you started this work, like connecting coaching and psychedelics?
what would I have wished? Good question. I mean, the things that I would have wished that were different were more like external, that there's not so much stigma around the topic in general. Also, combining those two, like coaching and psychedelics within the coaching industry. Also, some people don't really like seeing that. So I would say more openness maybe from the outside. But it's not that there was like an aha moment of, I wish I had known this tool earlier, or I had learned this too, and that would have changed the entire trajectory of how I work.
Mm-hmm.
Well, picking up on that point, right? Why do people or some people not think coaching and psychedelics together isn't a good idea? What's some of the skepticism that you meet, and how would you respond to that?
Well, what I've been like sometimes confronted with is, then it's not purely coaching because you're introducing a substance, and then it's like imagination, or it's not real, or whatever it is, and then explaining that it's actually bringing you deeper in. But there are different opinions on that. So for some people, they wanted coaching just be clean coaching and not bring in anything else than, I would say, the conscious mind in a non-altered state. And I do see a lot of like benefit of combining those two.
Mm-hmm. Microdosing. What are your thoughts?
What are my thoughts?
From a coaching perspective, right?
From a coaching perspective, I think it can be like a super good addition to like a deeper coaching process. Yeah.
Do you work with microdosing, or do people approach you for microdosing journeys? So coaching assisted microdosing, microdosing assisted coaching?
I personally don't work with it. I have had clients who microdosed, but it's not that I'm like preparing them for it or guiding them. There's different people who are specialized on that, and then I'll point them in a different direction. But for me, my like, don't want to say specialty, but my focus area is more really the ceremonial context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. But as we're talking about it, Julia, I realized we hadn't talked about it in a little while. I wonder if there's any updates in your thinking, or I know it's kind of taken the focus away from Katja, but since we're talking about it, and we only talk about once a month now.
I'd also be curious to hear.
It changed a bit, actually. So, I mean, I tried it myself more often, and I see more clients who did it, or who do it, or who want to do it. So it feels like for some people it is really good, especially after a bigger journey, to go on, like for the integration as well, because it really helps to elevate also feelings oftentimes. And the interesting thing for me is that it's faster for women than for men. So men seem to need to do it more on a longer basis to really have an effect and to open up for especially emotions. So when they journal and they do it on a regular basis, then you really can see a difference oftentimes. But still, I think it's not for everybody, and it's also depending on the substance they do it with. There are differences, but for me, it becomes more and more something that I at least give as an idea to people to try. So before a ceremony, sometimes it's also that people are not really willing to go into a big ceremony yet because they are maybe too afraid or have their thoughts about it and they shouldn't do it or not yet. And then sometimes it's a good idea to start with microdosing, to just get the substance in the body, to feel the connection, to work with the connection. And then I like this approach of between the research field or the westernized, very clean, information-based thing, and then on the other side also the indigenous view of the spirit of the substance and connecting with the spirit and working with the spirit. And that for me works quite well. So I'm still researching on it for myself and with clients, but it's more likely that I would introduce it.
Yeah, I'm really waiting on the research, right? The academic research, because we don't really know much at all about it. And I know there's a couple of really big studies underway. But, it's going to take some time. So for me, professionally, again, like if I wouldn't give any information on that because I just don't know the quality of the information that I'm giving. And while I might give some information to a friend based on my experience, with my coaching hat on, I don't want to put myself in that situation because really that person needs to take responsibility for what this is and how it works and does it work. And it seems to affect everybody really, really differently. And then also it's much more difficult to do it, in a legal setting, depending on where that person is and where they live. Right. I had a few clients in the Netherlands that just do that and decided to do that. I had zero involvement in them making that decision. And then the coaching is just like any other coaching too, right? Hold space, tune into them and see what they want to get out of it. It's just that, something else is added. And in a way, if somebody adds stringent exercise routine, or caffeine changes your experience, nicotine changes your experience, cacao changes your experience. I mean, there's so many things that you can do. Mindfulness changes your experience. If somebody has a meditation, develops a meditation habit or discipline during the coaching, it can open similar doors. So in terms of the coaching process, I don't feel it changes anything. When it comes to me, I wouldn't give people that idea, although I can also see why that can be a really good idea. I just don't really want that to come from me.
No, but I think also like we work in a very different way, like Yannick and me. So I'm not the coach in that way. So I'm more between the coaching and therapy and oftentimes also mentoring. So for me, it's just another way of working. And yes, having in mind like being legal and what information to give and what not. But I'm more likely that I make sure that people have the right information or the good information where I have a good feeling with, than letting them search for something because there's so much out there that is more risky than the things that I might tested before. So I can give them because I'm feeling good for myself with it. And it's also like I keep this container, like I tell them that they don't need to do it and that it's not the truth of it all. But if they decide it, then it's better to follow this and that.
And that's a sound ethical argument that if I give you information that is currently the best information that I know, regardless of whether it turns out to be academically true 20 years down the line, then in the interest of harm reduction, might it not be better to give out the best information I have right now, even if I'm not quite sure whether it's right, rather than give no information at all? Well, it can be a difficult decision to make, right? But I can see why for many coaches it feels like that's the right decision. It's like when we are in this gray space, the boundary. It's this person would really benefit from therapy, but they're not going to, or they don't have the means to, or they had a terrible experience with therapists and they're just out of principle would never work with a therapist again. And you feel a little bit out of your depth. So it like under normal circumstances, it would be an ethical decision to refer that person. But given that they're not going to work with someone, at least that's what they tell you, might it not be better if you're a little bit out of your depth, but at least they're getting some service rather than not? And I don't know what the right answer to that is.
I don't know either. But sometimes when people approach me and say, I want to, or I'm microdosing, or I want to do microdosing, it doesn't help if I say it's not a good idea, the research is not there yet, you shouldn't do it. So they would do it anyways. And then it's more a sort of harm reduction from my side to help them on their way.
I picture the train track dilemma, right? The philosophical one. Like as soon as you give information, you're kind of pulling a lever. As soon as you're somewhat, because information influence, right? And they can influence for the better or they can influence for the worse. And often we don't know.
You always influence, like your presence is influencing.
Yeah. But we can be more or less influencing, right?
Yeah, but Katja, I don't know how you see it, but I think like also in ceremonies, it's like you have so many different like facilitators, and it can depend on just the presence of the facilitator or the whatever robe they were or whatever it is. It's all influencing the scenery, the ceremony.
Yeah, completely agree. So much is like energetic, even without like no words spoken, nothing. It influences a lot. And yeah, I also get kind of the dilemma here with, what's the most ethical thing to do. For me, in those moments, I really also always try to come back to myself and how I approach it is, okay, what does actually feel is the best for the other person and the overall situation, given now taking my personal interest and everything completely out of the equation, and then seeing, is that like aligned with my truth, and can I like good-heartedly just say that, recommend that or not? And in one moment it might be one decision, and the other moment it might be different. But there's this area has so many like little micro moments or situations where there's no guideline or how to approach things, where you just need to rely on kind of your heart and your gut.
It's the same in coaching in general, right? There's so many times when we just don't know in that moment what the right thing to do is. And yes, everything is influence, right? Just by the way that we show up, just by the way a coach holds space, just by what they're wearing or how they look at you or how they listen, So I think this idea of neutrality is certainly a myth. But then, there's still a huge difference from that must have felt really good, right? And how did that make you feel? Versus what's going on for you right now? Well, what was going on for you in the moment? What impact did it have on you? I mean, you're all inquiring, you're all leading in a way through a curiosity of paying attention or inviting attention to the inner world, but one is very leading and the other one is, more neutral, like less leading. So I think it's helpful to at least develop an awareness of how we are influencing, and then making a conscious decision whether to lean into that or to lean away from it. I think that's an important skill for coaches to learn. I'm not pro or against leading or guiding necessarily. I know some people do a fantastic work being very active during a session. And one of the questions I got in Vancouver last summer was, well, on MDMA therapy, it's a vital part of the process that the therapist is intervening and guiding during the session. So yes, absolutely, there's an argument that this can have tremendously positive effect, but it does place a lot of responsibility onto the practitioner. So yeah, I just want coaches out there listening to this really asking themselves, in and outside of psychedelic spaces, to what extent am I influencing, and am I aware of how I might be influencing, and to what extent am I choosing to lean into that or lean away from that, or just let it happen and trust the process,
Yeah, but I don't think there's a way how you cannot influence, because just the fact that people also come to you as a specific person is because they even want that influence of your energy. want to be coached by you. They want to like be in your energetic field. They want to have this approach. So in a way, they are wanting a certain influence, but this like fine line of when am I introducing an idea and when am I just like letting the container have the influence it naturally has.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, right? An interesting moment for any practitioner, again, in and outside of psychedelic spaces. When somebody comes to me to work with me, regardless of what that is about, and I get the sense that they really seek me for who I am and my energy, and I then really talk about that. Because if I get that feeling, I kind of want to level the playing field, because I'm just a guy, I'm just like, what do I know? Really, like I might have some experiences, I might have had some relevant experiences, I might have some relevant information, but really if I get the sense that somebody is seeking guidance, I would want them to be their own guide. That's me, right? Other practitioners might lean into that and really own that they're guiding and that people seek them for it. So again, I think it's a decision we have to make. As long as people are aware that these kind of dynamics are happening, then we can make decisions to, let that happen or even use that. But when it comes to psychedelics, I would feel a bit like, oof, you're placing a lot of things on me here. And we can hold that lightly, agree to hold that lightly, have some kind of contracting conversation about it, or I can just go with it. And I think something that I'm a bit concerned about is that there's coaches out there that I've met who really, their ego is taken away by that. And people start really looking up to them and putting them on this pedestal and seeking them out because of their energy. And it does something to the ego. And if we're not careful, I think it can I've seen it take people away from doing really good practice to becoming some sort of spiritual guru. And at that point, I don't think it's as helpful as it could be anymore. But also I very much believe in coaching, right? There's lots of really helpful guruism out there. It doesn't have to be, bad for people. Yeah, I don't know. I'll pause here, see what you think.
I don't see it as either or. I can see how like both of them go along, and it's not so much for me about like the spiritual guru in the coaching space, but rather what I meant with that you cannot not influence. You probably both agree that certain people, when we meet them or when we're around them, something in their energy activates our energy. We just like feel different, or we feel more open, whatever it is. And it's not that the other person needs to do something or guide or say anything. It's just this pure, like it's more on a vibrational level. And with that you have different vibrational energetic containers with different people. So in a way, it's influence as well. And that we gravitate towards where we feel there could be expansion, that the like energetic field of the other person is allowing us to go into that expansion easily. And that's like very subtle. It's a very spiritual approach, but it's like very subtle. And I do operate in that like a lot. That's how I seek people out. It's not so much a rational mind decision, like what are the facts and do they really, I don't know, fit all those criteria? No, very often it's like a gut decision. It's about what energy am I perceiving from that. So I can also see how people come to you and they want to be exactly in that energetic container with you, but without you being the guru for them.
Yeah, Julia, any more you want to add to this or take this somewhere?
I was thinking about our quick fire questions because I'm very curious.
Cool, then we're aligned.
Good. So quick fire questions are the questions that we ask always in the end. It's not that you have to be too quick on it, so take your time, but it's more like not think too much about it, but answer right away out of your gut feeling. And
I have a feeling that'll be no problem for Katja.
I'm sure. First question is, what are some books or people that you had that had a significant impact on you and that you could recommend for people to read or to get to know?
In the context of your work, right? Coaching, mentoring.
Yeah. In the context of my work, consciousness medicine, I would say, was the biggest one. Mm-hmm. And that's it. I must say, I don't try to read too much because this is influencing my own consciousness. I rather do research and gather facts, but I want to rely mainly on my pure own experience. So the more you read and the more input you bring in, the more it's kind of waters things down. So there are certain areas where I prefer to not read too much.
I've heard someone say that before. Who was it? Who's the lady who runs Being True to You? Oh, shame on me. She was a guest here. She said the same thing.
I'm bad in words. Name.
I don't want to read. It's just yeah. Anyway, I always find it difficult when I hear that. But I don't want to interfere too much because I get it.
No.
Exactly. I mean, I get it. It's just there's the exchange, right? That being challenged on ideas or having inspiration from other people. So yeah, I'm in two minds. I totally get your perspective. It's just, I don't know, for some reason, I'm talk to each other. And, books are just ways to kind of talk to other people.
And it's Deanne.
It's what?
Right? Deanne Adamson.
Oh, yes, Deanne Adamson. Of course. Sorry, doctor. Cool.
Okay, no books. Good. So what do you, because we talked earlier about it, you said coaching and psychedelics, some people think it's not a good fit, but where do you see where will it go in the future? Do you see any future trends where coaching and psychedelics are a good fit?
Yeah, I see so many in general, personal development, whether that's more the coaching healing space, but that's of course more therapy. But when it comes to thriving or going into creative processes, maybe prototyping, different ways of coming up with ideas and new systems, new ways of doing things. There is so much potential that I see there. And I also see slowly a demand happening, people who are running companies and they want to bring their executive board to sit in ceremony before they go into the next strategic phase. That this wouldn't have happened a few years ago. So it's very exciting to see how that develops.
Mm-hmm. And if somebody were to ask you about, well, do I need coaching? Do I need therapy? Where's the difference? How would you sum that up, or what do you tell them?
Well, therapy is a lot focusing on the past and understanding where the suffering comes from, why it's there, what you can do about it. And coaching is more focused on the future. It's about also you look at where am I now, but it's more, you spend more time on where do I want to go to and what does that look like? So it's a different focus.
Mm-hmm.
Would you think that sometimes it's also when you are in coaching that there is something in the past that needs to be solved to go further in the direction of the future?
Yes, of course. So it's not that you can just that it's black and white, but it's more where does the majority, or where do you hang out the majority of time? Mm-hmm. Do you maybe look at something that needs to be healed, topics that come up that happened in the past again and again, that are holding you back from really accelerating and going for where you want to go? Or do you hang out more of the time really understanding and unpacking the past? Mm-hmm. That's a nuance.
Mm-hmm.
And any words of warning or words of advice for a coach who's curious about this work, who maybe is entering the psychedelic space and would like to help people, with their coaching to support them?
I mean, same goes for the people who are going into the experience, right? You're opening Pandora's box. You never know what comes. And in the psychedelic space, I think a lot is non-standardized. You cannot standardize it. You don't know what will come up. So also yourself as a coach being fine with holding that space and being fine with maneuvering the unknown also in the coaching container.
Mm. Cool. Julia,
And maybe without breaking confidentiality, can you tell us about your most memorable client or moment with a client?
Most memorable.
Tell us a story, Katja.
Yeah, I'm like, now I need to dig up which one am I picking.
Oh, that face! I would love to have access to your head right now. All the stuff that's going on.
So, like as an example, it's an also now entertaining story. As an example, how strong the mind is and how it can play tricks on you. In one like ceremony, one of the participants, he was, his biggest fear going in it was that he would like don't manage to go to the bathroom and that he would like crap himself. And he focused so much on it in the ceremony, he then really believed that it happened, and he didn't like dare to get up from his seat, because in his mind, like there was this entire story going on of how then the entire group would see it and he needed to pass everyone and so on. But he needed to pee like really, really badly. And after a few hours of being in agony, he said, okay, like I don't care. I let go of all this judgment, what other people think about me, and I'm going to the bathroom now, and witnessing like this catastrophe. And then he was like super surprised that nothing had happened, that his mind had made him believe that it happened to take him through that process. And it was just like also very beautiful how he shared it with a circle in the integration. And that just like came up as a little anecdote.
For hours, I was sitting there with you in my own shit. Wow. Yeah. That must have been an interesting integration process as well. Did you get to coach them afterwards?
Yeah, it took us like in unfolded a really beautiful like conversation and around how our perception and our like self-judgment and how we imagine things are not true, and how often it limits us tremendously in life, not only in little situations like that. So that just like also was a great like insight for many other people.
We create a lot psychologically.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I don't know, because we usually ask if you ever had to stop working with a client, but I think you already gave us an example earlier. Unless there's another one that you feel might be a teachable moment, perhaps, for coaches listening to this.
Stopping in the like psychedelics and coaching space, or in general, or
in the coaching space. So either kind of mid integration. I mean, the earlier example was like in the kind of and now the only word that comes to is psychologically created. Vetting comes to my mind now, even though I really don't want to use it. But in the vetting process, but kind of midway, mid integration or mid preparation. Something just came up and you just had a strong feeling of like, I don't think I'm the right person to work with them anymore.
No, I didn't. I had other situations where life circumstances changed for people, but that was not necessarily related to psychedelic coaching, where just a lot of things happened and there was no capacity and space to continue. And I also like saw that. But in general, my standpoint on this is when things are not aligned anymore, it doesn't make sense to force it. Of course, sometimes you encounter obstacles or resistance, and then it's good to challenge that and lean into it. But if it doesn't make sense from both sides, then it's also great to just let go.
Cool. Julia, I think there's one left, no?
Yes, our most favorite question. if you could take over the screen of a group of people or maybe the whole world, and you would have 1 minute undivided attention, what would you tell the people or the world?
Beautiful. I would probably say that we all came here to just like be who we truly are, and that we have every right to go into that self-expression and to do life exactly how we want them to, that our desires are there for a reason, and that everything along the way is just chatter of the mind, and that it's one of the most powerful things you can do for yourself to find ways to heal and manage and master your mind, whether that's psychedelics, but that's just like one little gateway of doing that. It's supposed to show you the way to a place where you can get to by other means if you practice, and that it's the greatest liberation and greatest gift you can gift yourself, and that's actually why you're here. So go for it.
Beautiful. Katja, how do people step closer into your sphere? Where can people find you, follow you, learn from you, work with you?
On social media, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. I also do have a website. I'm happy to share like all my social handles and links with you. Or meet me in one of the beautiful places around the world. I also like to network and meet people in person. So it comes in handy, not only being in Mexico, but also in Europe in different places over the summer. So I get to meet people in person and get to experience them and connect more deeply.
Beautiful. Katja, thank you so much for making time. Thank you for your work. Right. Thank you for allowing us to dig into how you work, how you do things, and challenge you and praise you. I really enjoyed this time. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you to both of you as well. I really enjoyed this, and thank you for creating this platform for the conversation and thoughts to continue and be exchanged. It's a really meaningful work.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you especially because you brought also plant medicines in the room, and I really enjoyed that, because I think you're the first in our interview line who's really also so deep working with plant medicines and coaching. So that was really interesting. Thank you for sharing all your knowledge.
See you around.
Have a beautiful rest of the day.
Bye.
Bye.